Good morning, good evening to all our listeners on NRI Samay. This is your host, Suresh. On December 22nd, in the northeast corner of India, and specifically in the state of Assam, there were serial attacks by the armed militants, which claimed at least 67 Adivasis in the villages in Sonitpur, Kokrajhar, and other districts. And it was a grim reminder of the ethnic violence that has been happening in Assam for more than 3 decades now. And the situation is only getting worse with every year that passes on. No matter which government comes, there is very little action that's actually being done to address these issues. And to talk about the history of the violence, to talk about the ground situation, what happens during these kind of ethnic violences, how is the day-to-day life gets disrupted, and what happens to the Adivasis who are caught in this conflict. We have with us today Kishalay Bhattacharjee, who is a very well-known journalist who has been with the broadcasting television for almost 20 years or more. And a good part of that, he was with NDTV as a resident editor, specifically covering the conflict in India's northeast. Kishalay, welcome to NRI Samay, and thank you for being on our show.
Good morning, Suresh. Good morning, NRI Samay, and your viewers and listeners. And a very happy New Year from New Delhi.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Indeed, a very happy New Year to you too. Kishalay, before we start off on this incident that happened on December 22nd, would you mind giving a quick insight into the history of the violence itself? You know, why is there this ethnic violence in Assam? When did this start? What is the root cause of this violence?
Okay, in India, I think Naipaul once described India as a million mutinies. Unfortunately, it still is a land of million mutinies, but the kind of violence that we see across India can be clearly differentiated into 3 different types. The eastern and central India is where we see the left-wing extremism, or the Maoist movement as it is known in India, which is also as old as, which started in 1967, went through a series of splits and mergers. They are not secessionists. They are obviously Marxist-Leninist movement which wants to usurp state power. Up in the north, the kind of movement that we see, the terrorism that we see in Kashmir is also secessionist, separatist, and it's different in nature. It is also supported by neighboring countries. In the northeast, however, the kind of violence that we witnessed is completely different. This also has a history. It goes back even before independence, but let's say from about 1958 that we've seen out here. There was secessionist movement as well as, but the stronger movements that we've seen in the northeast, and there were about 50 such armed groups in the northeast. Many of them are on ceasefire with the government of India now. They are on the negotiating table, but most of these movements are sub-national assertions. So it is about the ethnicities, because one of the largest number of ethnicities is what we find in India is concentrated in the northeast of India. And each ethnicity has been fighting for their own space, their own state, their own language, and many of them have picked up arms. That's a different trajectory actually of how the arms came in out there, but there is a proliferation of arms out there. Locally it is known almost in a light-hearted manner that insurgency or militancy is like a cottage industry in the northeast. So you just have to have a group of people and procure some arms and set up a organization claiming to be the spokesperson of this community or that community. And the current violence that we are witnessing, or we are going to discuss, is also again a group of highly trained militants who picked up the arms to claim actually as to be the representatives of a particular community called the Bodos in Assam, which is one of the eastern states of India. And they actually occupy geographically a very strategic area, which is called the north bank of the Brahmaputra. Brahmaputra is the river that comes down from China, which is one of the largest rivers of the world. And Bodoland begins where Bengal ends and Assam begins, and it stretches right up to Arunachal Pradesh and borders on one side Brahmaputra and the other side would be Bhutan. They also control the strategic rail heads and the rail lines that connect northeast India to the rest of the country. So, and this movement of the Boros, whether it is the present group that we are talking about or the previous groups, has been going on again since 1967. And all these groups have been claiming to be fighting for a separate homeland for the Boros. Suresh?
Okay. Now, you mentioned that Assam, or rather the Northeast, happens to have more than 60 ethnic groups. Could you describe who these ethnic groups are? What's the composition of these ethnic groups?
Well, it is an anthropologist's kind of almost a dream job to be in Northeast. In fact, we've had one of the finest anthropologists and ethnographers, Xavier Elwin, who was posted by Jawaharlal Nehru in the Northeast and who helped form his tribal policy. There have been several other people from across the world who've come there. It's fascinating out there. They've got a mix of different kind of ethnicities, really. One will have to be a social scientist to be able to talk about it. But say, for example, the Boros we talk about, their language comes from the Tibeto-Burman group of languages. In the Northeast, we have tribals as well as we have non-tribals. Assam, say, for example, if we talk about, Assam had or also has several small kingdoms earlier called, and they are the plains tribes. One is Boros, one is the Dimasas, the Kausaris, the Missings, the Tiwas, the Rabhas, and it goes on and on till the Ahoms from somewhere in Southeast Asia, could be Yunnan, could be Thailand. One hasn't documented that very lucidly, but they came out here. A king called Sukafa who came with his band of army, and he established an empire which lasted longer than the Mughal Empire. It was 600 years of empire that they had. They finally defeated the Mughals on the Brahmaputra. It was a very strong kingdom. They came, they assimilated with the Indian culture. They actually became Hindus. They became disciples of Shiva. The followers of Shiva, and they started land revenue system, and they had laid out a proper empire, and they brought all these tribes under one umbrella, which today loosely we call Assamese. But what happened was in the 1950s and 60s, when the language agitation movement started in Assam against Bengali, the fight was between the Assamese language versus the Bengali language. Somehow the leaders of that agitation, and later, of course, the anti-foreigners agitation also in 1979, did not bring all these tribes into the leadership and into the process of their subnational assertions. And immediately, say, for example, the Boros or the Karbis or the Dimasas, they said, we are not Assamese. We have our own culture. We have our own language, and we want to assert that. And suddenly, by early 80s, they actually started wearing their own dress, which they had, out there. One, say, for example, an Assamese lady, they wear a half sari kind of a dress, which is called the Mekhela Sador, a beautiful piece of textile. Many others also would wear the same, dress. But the Boros by 80s had started asserting themselves, and they instructed that all Boro women have to wear their own dress, which is the dokhana. So these were little ways and means by which the assertion was happening. So it was like saying that don't include us in your that pan-Assamese umbrella. We are not Assamese, we are Boros. We are not Assamese, we are Karbis. And slowly and steadily that, I think, because it was not controlled, it was not addressed at that point of time, gave rise to what we are witnessing today, a more violent assertion of their identity.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that Bodo, they happen to have control over the most strategic places, bordering Brahmaputra on one side, Bhutan, and they have this railway line. Is there any other group other than the Bodos who are trying to assert in Assam, or it's primarily the Bodos who are taking strong opposition to the Adivasis in those areas?
See, if you're talking about Adivasis are concentrated mainly in tea gardens across Assam, because they were brought as indentured labor from the Chota Nagpur Plateau by the British to work in their tea estates. As against working in the tea estates, the British had actually offered them land outside the tea estates, and they were, for our understanding, let's say they are registered land. I mean, legal land ownership they had.
Mm-hmm.
That was 150, 200 years ago. They have become naturalized citizens of Assam, even though they are referred to as tea tribes. What happens is, in other places, the subnational, say for example in Karbi Anglong or in North Kachar Hills, in other places where these kind of insurgencies, militancy is there, the Adivasi population is not significant. There are not many tea gardens in those areas. Out here, you have, in this stretch, you have a lot of tea gardens, and you have a lot of Adivasi settlers who are also opposing the fact that the Bodos should be given a statehood. Okay, now let me tell you the problem. The problem arises if we specifically now go. So from 1967, the Bodos have been demanding a division of Assam 50-50.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you can only claim such a division if you have 50%, if you own 50% of the land, own as in, if you have your people settled in that 50% of the land, which was not the case. But so what they did is that they systematically, and I'm saying, I'm not talking of the civil population, I'm talking of the militant armed groups and of the other pressure groups that this community had. And there were many of them, not just one, not just the present one that we're talking about. It started in the mid-80s. From 1985, we've had militancy in Bodo land, and at least two major groups, and this is one of the splinter groups of one of the major groups were there. And they have been one of the most violent groups actually in the country, blowing up trains. Millions of people have lost their homes and hearts. Hundreds have died, and hundreds have gone missing. So that is the story out there. Now, in this stretch, there are so they have been demanding for the statehood, and they've been systematically killing people and systematically replanting their people along this north bank of the Brahmaputra, so that they can actually claim 50% of Assam. They have another problem. The other problem is that they don't have a population, which is they are not a majority in this area. So the government, because the Constitution of India has something called 6th schedule for the northeastern state and 5th schedule for the Adivasi areas in eastern and central India. And these schedules of the Constitution actually safeguard the identity of the tribal population there by giving them autonomy. So they extracted the Autonomous District Territorial Council from the government of India in 2003, which was then also an NDA government, like we currently have one. And which can be actually challenged whether it is constitutional or unconstitutional. But anyway, they have that council. They control that council, and they have reserved 75% of the seats in that council. Now, the Adivasis in other parts of the country are tribals. Out here in Assam also, they have been fighting for their tribal status. If they get tribal status, then they will have a legitimate part to be part of that council, which the Bodos don't want. Number A. B is that how do you become a majority in an area where you are not a majority? The only way is to drive those other people out. And then you become the only community living out there. So the other prominent communities living out there, A, are the Adivasis or the T tribes as they're known in Assam. B is Bengali-speaking Muslims, which is again another almost like another genre, another community referred to as these names. This would not be a kind of reference found in other parts of the country, but in Assam this is how they are referred to as. Now these are the two major groups who have significant population in Bodoland and who have been opposing the demand for a statehood and have also been opposing what was given to them under the 6th schedule. And that is why the Bodo militant groups have been training their guns on these two groups. In 2012, we've seen that for months they had trained their guns on the Bengali-speaking Muslims, and this year on the Adivasis. But these are not the two isolated ones. Actually, the war against these two groups started in 1996. Once there was a wave of violence in 1996, then 1998, then again in early 2000, then we've seen in 2012, and now 2014. So there is a systematic ethnic cleansing that has been going on in this part of the country, and pretty much the response of the government has pretty much been just a law and order approach.
Yeah, that was my next question. Nice segue into the how the government actually handled this whole situation back when the Bangladesh war, and also in 1968 when this all started. What kind of arrangements were made to get these 60 ethnic groups under one umbrella and giving the Adivasis the constitution provisions to retain their autonomy? Can you give us insight into the government-related decisions and how far they have been sort of successful in holding this together?
Well, Suresh, I have absolutely no doubt that the government is aware of the problems. So whatever I am discussing, whatever other people are discussing is not something that the government is not aware of or does not know. So I will not grant them that lack of intelligence or the lack of information. I think the lack is basically of political will, of bureaucratic lethargy in addressing a part of India which is not considered priority for whatever reason. The only way that Delhi and the policy makers have seen Northeast, and I don't know whether it is a colonial hangover, but they have seen the northeastern part of India as a part which should be retained for strategic reasons, and to retain it, to deploy as much as armed forces as necessary. And that is why the approach towards any problems in the Northeast has always been dictated by force, by law and order. And unfortunately, that has been the way even today. So every time there has been a surge and a spike in killings, automatically, like in any other place in the world, the military, the police forces, the law and order machinery cracks down. They bring it down to an optimum level. They ensure that normal life is again restored, and then it's forgotten. So, and that is one problem. The other problem is of appeasement. The way, and appeasement everywhere actually, but in the Northeast it has been much more, and that this has also probably been a part of, again, I don't know, colonial policy of actually just calming these groups down by giving them softs, by granting amnesty, by bringing them into a peace, so-called peace process with an inverted commas, by absorbing them into the political process. Now, I don't know whether there are better ways of dealing with such situations, but certainly, as experience says, that this is not the best way. Because what happens is that group after group comes up, picks up the arm, claims to be representative of one community to the other, kills people, carries out extortion, and then surrenders, and then becomes part of the political process, but they don't give up the arms. So the arms keep circulating out there. And remember that we are talking of extremely, extremely strategic region of the world. This is the area which has 5 porous borders. So we are talking of a border with China, border with Burma, Myanmar, border with Nepal, border with Bangladesh, and border with Bhutan. We are talking of an area geopolitically which is very sensitive. geopolitically, which exports or sends out, smuggles out huge amount of narcotics, wildlife parts, gun running. So we are not talking of just any other part of the country, but we are talking of a part of the country where there is a lot of international underworld stake, and it is important, it is convenient for these underworld operators, global underworld operators, to really see this entire area destabilized, so that the law and order machinery is concentrated actually on these kind of ethnic movements, ethnic militias, so as to say, while the other kind of trade actually goes on undeterred.
You mentioned about the peace talks, right? It's more like an appeasement that each divisive group gets something, and then their needs are satisfied, and then they go back. But has there ever been any attempt to sort of bring about sort of a sustained peace negotiation between these groups? Because I believe from 2002 till like 2010 or 11, there were not that many incidents of this kind of ethnic cleansing that happened within those 10 years. I'm wondering what was the difference, within those 10 years versus what happened prior to that and what happened after that.
Well, now, even in that 10 years, you see what happens is that just because the number of people dying is not very high, it doesn't mean that people have not died.
True.
People have died. People have died. I mean, I have covered repeatedly the same areas, the same people going back to the same relief camps, coming back after 2 months from those relief camps. Some people may have disappeared. Some people may have gone away in search of a livelihood. But the purpose of driving them out of their homes serves a purpose, because each wave of violence actually ensures that some people are gone. So you reduce the number of people, and you reduce also you discourage people to return to their homes because of the fear of life, livelihood, etc. You see what had happened was in 2003 when they came over ground, one of the groups called the BLT, the Bodo Liberation Tigers, and they were far more violent actually than the other group. They were responsible for more train blasts than others. They were quickly brought into the political process, and they are the ones who became the partners in the Congress-led government in the state, and they also control the Territorial Autonomous District Council. So they had two roles basically. They were part of the alliance in the state government, as well as they ruled the district council, autonomous district council out there locally. So when they were in charge, obviously the killings came down, but the nuisance elements were moving around because they had greater autonomy and immunity as well. Now the other group, called the NDFB, obviously what the government was trying to bring them also onto the negotiating table. What was perhaps missing in the reports those days were more fratricidal turf wars between the NDFB and the former BLT, where the former BLT, who became part of the political process, used the political machinery and law and order to ensure that the NDFB, the other group, was isolated, cornered. And then when the leader of the NDFB was finally arrested in Bangladesh, because between 2009 to 2011, actually Bangladesh handed over to India a significant number of militant, separatist armed leaders that India has been asking for many decades, many years actually. So that has been the turning point in the whole narrative of militancy in the Northeast. But I don't think the government of India was good enough to take advantage of that gesture that was made by the neighboring country. And when NDFB leader was arrested, and even before that, when NDFB actually agreed to come on a ceasefire, and they were in ceasefire camp made by the government, and they were supposed to follow ceasefire ground rules, in 2008 came another wave of violence, the worst terror attack that was carried out in Assam. There were 5 serial attacks in the space of 5 minutes across the state, and in the capital Guwahati, near the capital complex, Dispur town. In Guwahati, actually, there were 2 blasts. I was there witnessing it. More than 100 people died, more than 700 were injured. It was a terrible blast that was triggered off by the NDFB, and they were on ceasefire with the government. So they were in a peace process, and they came and they killed people. After this blast, actually the group split, and there was a no-talk group and there was a talk group. So there's still now the no-talk group that we are talking about is the NDFB faction which carried out the recent killings of last month.
Now, in terms of the normal life getting disrupted, after the violence and the kind of displacement that follows, and I'm not sure if the Adivasis or the people affected would they ever go back to their places? Like, can you describe what a normal life looks like and how it is actually disrupted whenever these kind of violent incidents happen?
See, the entire Bodoland stretch is, of course, different in character in terms of demography. Right. So there would be areas where there would be, larger chunks of non-Bodo population, and I suppose there would be normal life going on there. In the Bodo majority areas also are, normal life, as in for you and me, would probably be seen as normal life. But there would be, very strong undercurrents of anti-Bodo, non-Bodo, exclusion of non-Bodos in those areas. Say, for example, in schools and colleges, I remember after 2012 riot, Muslims were not welcome. Adivasis, the percentage of literacy is very low, so maybe school and college will not matter so much. And I told you that most of the Adivasis were meant to be in tea gardens. They were brought up indentured laborers to work in the tea gardens. As long as they're inside the tea gardens, it doesn't really matter. But if we are talking about people who are in labor outside, they may lose their livelihood. They may have to go out, in search of work or something of that sort. So, it is, that entire area is a very, it's a very ragtag area which has gone through militancy for a very long time. And it's a ravaged place. So for a lot of outsiders, it may look like a place which is completely ravaged because it has seen militancy since 1985. Their development process that you see, half of the roads are constructed, half of them are not. There is an effort and an attempt at bringing about development, but it's obvious that things are not running properly out here. But people are still going out, carrying on their own lives. They're attending work. People are falling in love, getting married. I mean, this is something that I always say that we run the danger of a single story by only talking about insurgency and militancy in an area, because everything else goes on in that area, really. Right. But there is but to put it in one word, yes, there is a dysfunctionality about the area. There is the area. If you scratch the surface, there is a dysfunction.
And obviously, you have been covering Northeast region for almost more than 2 decades, maybe now. But otherwise, in terms of the media penetration into Northeast and specifically in Assam, how would you, if you were to describe the media coverage, you made a very valid point that we are only highlighting one side of the story. The other side of the story is always left out. How much do you think the media coverage has been, just in general, talking about Assam or Northeast?
I think extremely inadequate media coverage has taken place. And even if there has been media coverage, I don't think so. It has been deep, incisive, with enough understanding. And there is a reason to it. It's like, any other part of the world. Media is mostly concentrated in the metropolitan states or areas. Media is not found everywhere. That's entirely because of the lack of resources. It is the national broadcaster who has the resources, the reach, the manpower to be able to go to every part of the country. And they, unfortunately, do not have failed utterly in transmitting what they are supposed to transmit. They have failed at their job. Private broadcasters do not have the resource to send people to too many places. There is a logistic problem. I mean, if you want to get a news from a state like Arunachal Pradesh, I mean, say, for example, to set up offices in all the states of the country, that resource is not there. So people like me would be traveling between states, and logistically that is very difficult in a place like Northeast. So how many states can you cover? How many news can you cover? A news gets dated after a few hours, after 24 hours in today's digital era. So, so it is the inadequacy of resources, A. B, yes, tremendous amount of disinterest or non-interest, which I have no explanation for, and I don't know. This is also a global problem. The certain parts of each country which are covered more than other countries. Say, for example, I think even if you are in the United States of America, probably the East Coast is covered more than the West Coast. I am not very sure of how much are your places like Utah and other places are actually even covered in the mainstream media of that country. So similarly, in India, it is not just the Northeast. I mean, we have no coverage whatsoever of Himachal Pradesh. We have very inadequate coverage of Rajasthan. We don't have coverage of Uttarakhand. We have only in Bangalore we are based. We are not. We don't cover most of Karnataka. We don't cover most of Maharashtra. So if that way, if you see, I feel 80% of India is actually not even covered by media. And I'm being generous. Probably even 90% of India is not even covered by India. But when violence happens and the nature of the beast is such, you are almost forced to go and cover it. So it appears that that media comes to us only when we kill. So that perhaps sometimes even spike increases the spike in killing, because they feel that if we kill more, we will get more media coverage. So it's not as simple as the media doesn't cover. That yes, media doesn't cover because of A, B, C. There are number of reasons of why media cover, but it doesn't take away from the fact that media doesn't even have any interest. Now, why media doesn't have interest also stems from the fact that the center, and I wouldn't use these words otherwise, but I'm using it for the sake of convenience. The center-periphery relationship in India has been largely a traditional one where these are seen as peripheries, and just the way the policy is dictated only by force and not by inclusion, not by an understanding, not by understanding the problems or the necessities or the questions raised by people around the country. Similarly, the media also views these places as places where they need to go only when there is violence.
True. So, Kishalay, after covering Northeast for these many number of years, if you were to be included in this expert committee to come up with some workable solutions, agreed, these will be long-term solutions, but if you were to lay out a plan in place, what would that be?
Well, I am trying to work and trying to impress people on something that I'd be hugely grateful if there's support for that. I feel that we need to do capacity building of grassroots journalists. We already have young men and women across the countryside who've got a camera, who've got a laptop. We call them stringers, international media calls them fixers. But we use them as primary sources, and we use them only when there was a news breaking, which means people dying. But if we can give them, we can enhance their training, if we can actually teach them what journalism is about, then we have a ready-made resource in each corner of, let's say if you're talking about Northeast, but I'm talking about the entire country really, and I'm talking of the 3 conflict zones. And what happens is that the mainstream media and, whether it is national mainstream media or international media, they have the space. There is an unlimited portal that we have. We have a 24-hour cycle of news. We need news. The problem is that there is no money to send your reporters to run bureaus in places, but they don't mind buying it from the ground because it comes very cheap. And it also then there will be a regular supply of news. So what happens is that you are not getting news only when people are dying. You are getting news even on other times. So, say the Adivasis, the fact that the Adivasis, there's such a large population of Adivasis in Assam is not going to be, reported only when they are fleeing from their homes. It's going to be reported only even otherwise. And by doing that, you can dispel the stereotype. You can actually fight prejudice. You can, actually challenge the whole notion of the single story, and you have multiple narratives. And only when you have multiple narratives can you actually conceive the notion of one India. If you're going to talk about one India, if you're going to talk about inclusivity, I don't think so. A double-digit growth figure is really going to matter. What we require is more that this whole change of perception that they are different and we are different. That is not going to work. It has to be one India at least with diversity. Diversity is our strength, but out here, unfortunately, diversity has become a huge weakness in this country. And, one group and one ethnicity is killing each other, trying to assert their own identity. That is not required, and that can be dispelled, I feel, through multiple narratives, and that can be done. I'm saying from a purely journalistic point of view. There are other ways of, addressing this as well. But I think one of the most potent ways is to use this, because media is a force multiplier. And why not leverage the media's strength in trying to put together India as one.
Right. Well, you put it very well, Kishalay. Multiple narratives is definitely the way forward to introduce people to the other side, other stories that are conveniently left out. I think that I would even take that as a resolution for NRI Samay also to bring out more stories from Assam, not just the ethnic violence, but in general the life in Assam.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope you carry out more such stories, because it's not just Assam. I mean, that area has a fascinating history. It has tales. It has narratives. All the states out of that area, and that. It requires, it requires much more coverage of not only when people die, but even otherwise.
True. Well, on that note, Kishalay, thank you very much for being on the show today. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Rich. Thank you.
Thank you.